You're live.
Welcome to the 2021 budget meeting in Stoneville Township. Tonight it's a normal council meeting and is virtually attended and is being shown on YouTube. So tonight, before we go further, I'm going to go around the table and I'm going to ask all the council members to identify themselves, and then Brian is going to help us here from staff. So I will start from my right.
Angela Land, Counselor. Deb Thompson, Counselor.
Kelsey Anderson, Counselor. Kevin Richmond, Counselor.
Sherry Milligan, Counselor.
John Wise, Deputy Reed.
Eric Smith Reed. That being said, I'll hand it over to our CAO and he can tell who's here tonight to answer questions and make things for our budget.
First, Your Worship, thank you. Myself, Brian Brooks, as the Chief Administrative Officer Clerk. Just by show of a hand raised, if we could identify the staff we have with us this evening. The Manager of Planning, Deputy Clerk Jason Sands. We have the Public Works Manager, Fire Chief Jeff Thompson. The Public Works Supervisor, Ian Barris. The Deputy Fire Chief, James Richmond. The CBO Properties Manager, Jake Detler. The Parks and Recreation and Arena Supervisor, Al Fenwick. And the Treasurer, Christina Beauchamp.
Thank you. With that being said, tonight, after 5 o'clock, we're going to have numerous meetings here. So we're going to make a max tonight 2 hours. We can do it an hour and a half, time, whatever. As numbers come in, a lot of new numbers for everybody here. So when it comes to 7 o'clock, I'm going to pull a plug on this because we're going to have more meetings. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to CAO, Brian Brooks.
Your Worship, just as a courtesy update for the council members and to our staff, the approach that we would like to use this evening, if council permits, is I would like to go through the budget narrative, highlighting the larger big ticket items with respect to each department and the ones that impact the corporation through various categorical portions as part of our budget narrative. As we go through those departments, I would like to go through and highlight those bullets. If there's any discussion or question at the end of those, I would just ask that the Public Works Manager for the Public Works Management Department be granted that opportunity to be addressed in case there's any questions inside that respective department, as in many cases they're well versed on a lot more detail of those items than myself. It also gives council members an opportunity to become a little bit more familiar with the specific items on that budget. If that's okay, I would proceed through the first part of the budget narrative. What you have before you this evening is a budget, first draft budget for consideration of council. To this point, our senior management, along with myself, CAO, and the Treasurer, have had meetings, senior management meetings, since November 2020. To date, there's been various single department meetings with the Treasurer and myself, along with 3 budget meetings that have been held collectively to try to get a collective approach to what you have here this evening. If you will, the preparation of this budget is, as we mentioned earlier and relayed earlier to the read, we have no expectations that we would get any sort of movement to this budget as part of presentation. This is just an information only and an opportunity for council to be aligned with what has been submitted as a first draft. Following this, we would like council to endorse a 3-reading process that allows us to have separate readings at 3 different budget meetings to allow opportunity, if anything's provided from the public, to allow opportunity and transparency as far as what's included in the budget to have time prior to its passing. So without further ado, I'd just like to provide some summaries of the inclusions that are inside this budget. So the first, I'll commence on page 2, which is covered as all departments. At present, staff and management compensation grids for the municipality are ending a 3-year agreement or resolution from Stone Hills Council. In 2018, 19, and 20, there was a wage approved by council on a 3-year basis, and that's usually done to offset the timing of the election. So we elect to use a 3 year period so that it's not the first order of business of a new council and it's not the last order of business for an exiting council. As part of a management initiative, we have, as in the past negotiations or recommendation, if you will, we have attempted to get representation from all departments of our municipal operations to sit at a table and come forward with a collective ask. I'm happy to report that collective ask from our staff was well considered of the economic times that we're currently enduring with COVID. So the request, there's 3 requests as part of this year's budget, which from a cost perspective has what we believe to be an inflation-based request on behalf of staff. So the first request is that cost of living allowance be granted for 2021, 2022, 2023, based on whatever that inflation number be at the time of budget compilation for the following year. The second request is there were numerous discussions throughout this process to the impact of our public works employees. Specifically, at present, there's nothing in the compensation grid that would allow for shift premium, as all of our employees in the public works department are required to take at least 2 weeks of afternoon shifts. There's no compensation for being on call in the winter season, and there's no compensation for call-outs after hours. For instance, individuals that receive call-outs at 2 a.m. and are in until 12 p.m., a 10-hour shift, what would be a normal duration of a day, there's no compensation change for their hours from 2 a.m. Till their normal scheduled time at 6:30 a.m. The discussion was originally looking at a shift premium, looking at an on-call stipend payment that may compensate them for being on call, as well as some additional overnight weekend rate that would be applicable for the winter season. I'm happy from a management perspective, along with the management team at the Public Works, that we've been able to come up with what we believe to be a far more reasonable approach, rather than create a number of wage tiers for different scenarios. The collective ask is that a $1 shift premium per hour per roads employee that has these responsibilities be implemented for the 21-week period that includes our winter schedule. So rather than have a number of different wages and a number of different overtime hours, each employee that has after hours on-call irregular shift responsibilities would simply receive just a $1 per hour shift premium for the winter season. The benefit to the staff is that this is a $1 an hour increase during payments where they would have normal hours. The benefit to the municipality is the $1 per hour is very minimal compared to what some of the other alternatives are within the form of a shift premium, on call, or overtime for after hours. So this would equate to approximately $40 per week per employee over a 21-week period, is approximately about $840 collectively over the winter season, plus any overtime that would be attributed to that would also be attached to that $1 per hour as well. So that's the second request. The third one is presently there's a clerical reserve fund that's in the municipal reserve funds, which is actually compiled of a premium based, an employee paid premium reserve. So this reserve has $70,000 in it and it is compiled of reserves that was actually paid by employee premiums from a past benefit plan. In my 6.5 years here, management have constantly looked for an opportunity to start to put that back into the compensation of the full-time employees that have that contributed to that in the form of a collective benefit that we could agree on. This year, given the insurance premiums, the impact of the insurance market, the benefits due to COVID, the recommendation coming forward was, rather than try to increase our benefit plans in the form of increased coverage for, say, eye care or dental or medical, we would have a self-administered benefit that would be the equivalent to a one-time $300 per full-time employee that could be utilized for whatever that employee felt was a requirement from a benefit perspective. So if one employee wanted to increase chiropractic, they could utilize that stipend payment for that. If other wanted eye coverage, if others wanted, some sort of massage therapy, they would have the opportunity to do that. The reason that we're suggesting that it would be self-administered is that there's a 10% premium at minimum for administration through our benefit company. So in the essence of, if it's a $300, it would cost $330 for our benefit provider to administer that on our behalf. Our preference is to not have 10% of that fund go back into an administration when we believe that it's very easy to justify $300 in some form, whether it's orthodontic or some other medically based benefit for a staff member. So in the proposal, the recommendation was that the staff would get that $300 per year payment as a self-administered benefit, and council would authorize that for the duration while there's funds remaining in that clerical reserve fund. The recommendation also asks that council consider carrying this forward once that fund is utilized. I will caution council, even if they wanted to approve this, and I've shared this same information with council, even if they supported this in principle, it's not possible for our current council to hold a future council to the obligation of carrying forward that benefit. So I won't ask council to make a formal decision on that carrying it forward, as it's something that would be utilized for negotiations in a future compensation package. But I will ask council to at least acknowledge the recommendation as part of as part of our recommendation in 2021. So also included in this budget is all increased premiums for workplace, WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board, EI, and the Employment Insurance Canada Pension Plan premiums, and employee benefit rate adjustments. They're all included in this budget. So that's essentially the corporate overhaul, if you will, to a compensation package. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those, or I can proceed into the general government administration.
What did you mean by carry it forward once it's utilized? What did you mean by carry it forward once it's utilized?
Your Worship, the recommendation to carry forward this benefit once the fund has been utilized. Right now, there's approximately $70,000 in a reserve fund that is made up of employee-based premiums. So employees actually contributed to their benefit plan, and when the benefit plan changed, those dollars were transferred back to the municipality, and the municipality put those into a reserve for the benefit of staff. So there's approximately 32 full-time staff members at approximately $300 per. That's approximately $9,600 a year. There's $70,000 in the fund, and once our expectation is that we ride that fund out at the $300 per employee for the year. Once that's done, we would hope that council would consider continuing a benefit similar to that moving forward. That is, at that point, that dollar value would impact the budget. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. How many employees would the $51 shift premium apply to, Brian?
The number of employees that have afternoon shifts, call-in capabilities in your regular shift is 17 in the Public Works Department. It's also relevant to note that any wages as part of the winter season that are attributed to the maintenance contracts to which the township have, we would also have the ability to submit for reimbursement. Most notably, the county maintenance contract that we have, any increased costs that we have with regards to staffing for those would become eligible for recollection under that maintenance contract.
Okay, Johnny.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, the guys that would get the $1 increase for the 21, are they still being paid for like on call? Do you have somebody on call, Jeff? And also for call-outs, do they get paid extra for that?
Our on-call patrol is done by the supervisors and myself, rotating once every 4 weeks, so there's 4 of us. And that's we get our 80 hours in lieu time for doing that on-call patrol. Anybody else that's on call, they just get their overtime for that weekend or by the hour.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? No, go ahead, there, Ryan.
I'm just gonna grab a drink. I gotta try through.
Good check over there. I don't know.
I said that. I do.
Okay, Marina? Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead, it's just a quick question with this. The 300 for full-time employee, how does that work, Brian? They get the 300 and they use it however, or do they have to bring in like a receipt or like, I'm just wondering how you're gonna work that.
So the plan is, your worship, to have, if I may. So the plan is, your worship, to have a self-administered benefit, meaning it's a township-based administration. So rather than, as I mentioned earlier, increase those premiums, that once per year, any employee can make requests to our treasurer for the submission of that one-time self-administered benefit. So our benefit plan covers our employees, it covers our families, and so rather than have a requirement to provide proof or to provide information, we would provide them with a letter with the payment that this is in lieu of any increases, and it's meant to be utilized for family benefit administration in a fashion similar to the comprehensive benefit package that we have. Our benefit package that we have, Councillor Richmond, covers some areas, but it doesn't cover others. For instance, anything that's eligible under this Canada Revenue Agency would be the guidelines that we would try to attach this to. That was the original discussion as to how we could see this being administered. One of the requests that come in was also a uniform allowance, in the sense that the roads were going through an awful lot of clothes with dirty construction projects, etc. And so part of the compromise to that request was to come back to that self-administered benefit, and that the employee would receive the benefit in lieu of any changes to our benefit plan. So if one employee chose to go out and replace clothes that were damaged, this payment is a benefit package that's in lieu of us making any changes to that comprehensive benefit package.
So everybody's gonna get the $300 and spend it what you need it on. Yeah. Okay. No, I'm asking because if it's just for, say, glasses or something, somebody may not need anything, so they wouldn't get anything. Whereas if you give it all of the 300 to everybody, then they can utilize it the way they need to.
Councillor Richmond, that's a very good point. And that's actually the difficulty that we had coming to terms with the request for that ask. We have eight staff members here this evening. Admittedly, we can't even come to an agreement on an increase. If we were to ask council to increase one coverage, one may want eye coverage, others don't have glasses. One may want chiropractic, others don't use it. So it's a very difficult thing when we're administering an employee-based fund that's there rather than the comprehensive benefit package that's administered by council. So we've worked actively for a majority of the past 4 years to try to find some common ground that would hit all full-time employees that were the contributors, the full-time employees to that reserve fund. And we even discussed looking at a part-term alternative and in a shorter compensation, and that was met with some opposition as the part-timers were not the individuals that contributed to that reserve, and so that's why we come back at just the full-time benefit.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I think actually that we should just accept this for now for information. And in fact, I think we probably should have a discussion closed session about this. Anytime you get talking about individuals, whether it be all or in part, in this case, there are segments of it, you run the risk of, identifying people, things like that. So we should discuss all the avenues and then come back with what we think is appropriate.
Yeah, we go through the presentation thing in the next meeting, and we want to go into the session, we'll move forward on it. Okay, move ahead, Brian.
With your permission, Your Worship, I'll go into general government administration. At the end of this line item, if there's anything inside the administrative budget, both Christina and I or Jason would be happy to answer any questions that the council wish to point in their direction. So included in the budget that you have in front of you, and it's important to note that I attempted to go through, so the budget copy that has been posted online, the budget copy that is in front of council members this evening is departmentalized, and I've attempted to keep that narrative somewhat in that order, departmentalized, but recognizing the difficulties of jumping back between document and narrative. So I'll go through them, and if council wishes for me to slow down, by all means, I'd be happy to do so. So included in the general government administration budget is an estimated decrease in the allocation under the OMPF. That is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, and that grant has reduced by $30,200 from 2020, or a 2.64 reduction in allocation. In this budget, we also have, and this is an annual discussion that is had by council. 3 years ago, when we discussed how we would disperse the Loyalist Solar Revenue, management brought back a recommendation for use of the Community Vibrancy Agreement that would see a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 contribution into 3 different areas. 1/3 of the contribution, so the total value, I believe, is 145.8. That breaks into 3 equal nominations of 48,600. 48,600 in the budget that you have here is being utilized against the tax rate. $48,600 is being designated as a recommendation as a community development initiative council endorsed project, which is we're earmarking for the Tamworth Medical Center. Previously, in the latter parts of 2020, we received a recommendation and a project budget, if you will, from the CBO, highlighting that the proposed expansions to Tamworth Medical Center may cost in the range of $250,000, and we've attempted to cover that $250,000 in the budget. So in addition to the 1/3 going against the tax rate, we're allocating another third, the 48.6 to the Community Development Initiative, and the third 48.6 we're recommending to go into a reserve for a future project. So that leaves 48.6 of the funding for the $250,000. We're recommending $51,400, totaling $100 or $100,000 combined, would be taken from the Community Vibrancy Reserve to have the municipal's contribution of $100,000 towards that $250,000. In addition to the solar money that's attached, the municipality, it's recommended that the municipality would allocate the $50,000 physician recruitment reserve towards this project, which would be $150,000, and the municipality has a COVID-19 resilience fund for alterations due to the restrictions of COVID for $100,000, which proposes the $250,000 budget for this project. Before I move forward, are there any questions on that? Just clarification, or is it clear where those funds are entirely coming from? Because we, even from a management perspective, we understand that that's a little bit of a earful to comprehend. Okay. So in addition to the Expansion to the medical center, all support for financial software, which is currently Assist. That's our software, our IT support, internet, iCompass, ArcGIS, Esri, website hosting, support computer replacement, laptop replacements, and increased network security and backup battery surge protectors for the network are all included in this budget. We have saw some changes to those areas as a result of trying to be COVID-19 flexible, as well as trying to improve our network security as a result of the 2020 cyber breach. Also inside this budget, we have a contribution of a cumulative elections reserve for $12,000. This is a 4-year allocation that we put into a budget with the expectation that we do a budget in the election year, and any outstanding amounts would be utilized in that budget year for the operations of an election. The election takes place in 2022, and we're recommending another $12,000 contribution into that reserve, which will leave us with, I believe, $36,000 in the reserve, and the rest would be required to be budgeted next year based on the needs of an election and the costs associated with running such. Also inside that budget is the $7,000 donation line item. This $7,000 is a line item that's administered by council based on requests for donation for community organizations on an annual basis. This number is the same as it was in 2020, and we're unaware of any additional requests in addition to those numbers that would change the requests at this time. The next item that's the first large ticket item, if you will, as far as change to our municipal operations is, at present, we've been advised that we should be recommending to plan for a 35% increase to our municipal insurance policy. This information was quite shocking to the management team. However, we're being advised that even municipal policies that have clean claims for 2020 and good claims history are experiencing 15 to 20% increases due to the market impact as a result of COVID. Once it was better explained that the same insurance providers that provide coverages for small businesses and loss of revenue and other claims that are in, it become a little bit more palatable to me that we could see the impact associated with those increases to the premiums. We don't know what those exact numbers are. We're in the process of providing the renewal documents at present. They will not provide a review in advance of, or sorry, outside of 60 days of a renewal, and our renewal is April 1st. So we have basically incorporated throughout this budget a 35% increase to every increased budget line, or an overall impact of $55,000 to plan for what those premiums may be. I have asked for an opportunity for our insurance broker and Mike Earhart of McDougall to be prepared to come to council and provide a delegation if council should wish to do so once our premiums are brought in. But there are a number of support resolutions going through the province right now, seeking the province to interject with the liability insurance that increases that the municipalities are enduring. Also included in that, we have $15,000 for council conferences / training. That equates to a $2,500 reduction, which is $2,142 per council member. We were reluctant, and a common theme to go through this budget is we were somewhat reluctant to make alterations to the budget that we expected would have to go back into the budget next year. So by going forward with an aggressive approach from a management perspective, we didn't want to put ourselves in a shortfall in 2021 by making an aggressive pitch of 1.5 this year, or when we started, if it was 1.5 this year, knowing that we would already be at 1% before we ever started next year. So a common thread throughout here is if council wishes to change these dollars and put them into a reserve, we can do so, but I would remind council that any surplus in line items go into a reserve for the municipality if they're unutilized. So we wanted to remain consistent and not make any predictions that we couldn't sustain as part of COVID. There are a number of virtual opportunities that are starting to become more prevalent, and we didn't want to impede council's ability to attend if there was something that comes up in the remaining portion of the year that they wish to attend to. Also included in this, we have a $10,000, we're commencing a $10,000 reserve for the future replacement of the township's administration operating system. Our operating system is relatively dated in the sense that we want to plan to have a reserve fund set up that in the future we would have funds set aside to replace our operating system that might better reflect the entire operations rather than just the financial software of our municipality. This budget also includes the impacts of a realignment to the township manager positions to capture their corporate responsibility. It's recommended and endorsed by council that the treasurer would assume the manager of finance / treasurer's position. The public works manager and fire chief would assume manager of public works and emergency services. And the manager of planning deputy clerk would assume the manager of development services. And inside that job description would remain responsibilities as a deputy clerk. The adopted compensation grid for these management positions is with a graduated 5-step process. These are new positions to our township with 2 additional 3% steps that may be activated by council by resolution for industry trade shortage. These changes have a $13,667 impact on the 2021 budget, and I would just like to provide explanation of the 2 additional steps. When the Granular report was completed in 2018, there were 5 positions that were identified as potentially industry trade shortage. They have an asterisk beside their position, and if council should ever desire to increase the cap or the top end grid of those wages, there are 2 additional 3% wage lines that could be activated, but they can only do so by form of council resolution. This budget also has the inclusion of salary recommendations to align management and staff with the corresponding wage recommendations of the 2018 Parkland and Associates report, and these changes have a $16,318 impact on the 2021 budget, and all the recommendations and equity has been found to be neutral now as a result of the Granular report. There should be no additional recommendations coming from that report, as we are at the capacity and the location to which that report identified us with in comparison to the 13 municipalities. That's the last item, Your Worship. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Any questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
Brian, did you check with other insurers? I mean, I feel so sorry for the insurance companies.
The answer to that is, Your Worship, we did have discussions with our broker about, is this the year that we should go to tender? And it was absolutely not. Most insurance markers are not bidding on new accounts, and if they are, they're bidding them so high that they're getting a premium in order to get them. Based on the fact that we had 2 claims in 2020, that doesn't make us a real appealing new client to new providers, and it's anticipated that with the hard market, which is referred to, where basically insurance companies are in survival mode rather than aggression mode, it's expected that we would see even an increase to what our current renewal is by our own insurance provider if we went to market.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on, Brian.
Your Worship, the next department is Fire and Emergency Services. So likewise, Deputy Fire Chief Richmond and Chief Thompson are here this evening. I'll attempt to go through the largest portion of the big ticket items, and if there's any departmental questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to assist with answering questions. Included in this year's budget is a decrease in policing costs of $15,047, or a 1.4% decrease over the 2020 budget. In 2020, we were happy to report that our rates were 2016 equivalent, and this is a further reduction to that line. So again, we're happy to report that our policing costs are moving in a positive direction towards being a little bit more cost palatable for our municipality. This change is also, it's important to note, as part of the 5.1 no contract policing obligation that we're in right now, we are a little bit more susceptible to increased call volume should we have an abundance of calls, we could be impacted quicker than we would, but that's still utilized as part of a multiple year review. So if we had one bad year, we won't feel it all in 1 year. It will be, that data will be entered in and replace the oldest year. So eventually we will phase out and hopefully not feel the impacts of that single peak for increased calls. As part of that 5.1, we do become disqualified for some grants that were previously approved, which is the RIDE, which is and as well as the prisoner transport grant that was operated by the Community and Safety Ministry. So we do reduce those funds from our budget. We did so again in 2020, but again, it saw a positive move in the form of 15,000 or 1.4% to that budget. Included in the fire budget is an annual bunker gear replacement budget of $40,000. The cost per set is approximately $2,800. They have a lifespan of 10 years, and you'll see in the capital budget, you'll see included in there what the intent is for 2020. Funds are being allocated in the form of $630,000 for the replacement of pumper P711. It's a pumper rescue truck, I believe, and it's set for the Station 1 in Yarker. These funds are again coming out of the truck replacement fund in the fire reserves. Also included in the department, you'll see a contribution of $144,534 going into reserves for the Stone Mills Fire Department. That consists of $102,918 into the truck reserve and $41,616 going into the equipment reserve. If you have any additional questions with regards to budget inclusion or department, I'm sure Chief or Deputy Chief would be happy to answer those.
Any questions? We got the man on the table here. I guess seeing none. Move on, Brian.
Your Worship, just keeping with our discussion earlier, again, when it comes to the wages of the department, and you'll see this from a volunteer perspective, they're based on calls. We do anticipate that the call volume may be reduced, but without having certainty to do so, we were hesitant to budget and potentially experience shortfall as a result of that. Again, any shortfall of that would just increase the reserve contribution for the fire department. Next line item, sorry, the next part, sorry, Kevin.
A quick question. What happens to the old pumper truck? What do you do with those, Jeff? Do you tender them or get rid of them, or?
Yeah, typically in the past, we put them on Gov Deal, and it's an online auction, and other smaller departments or campgrounds or would purchase them or bid on them.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Right, Brian.
Again, Your Worship, not to confuse the issue, but when we do replacements, Councilor Richmond, of vehicles, we don't plan on a trade-in value or residual value because there's still a book value that still needs to be accumulatively covered as part of the depreciation that still remains on the books. So you'll see that in all of the equipment purchase. There still is the treatment of an asset that has a valuation on our books, and so that's why we hold off predicting what that residual value will be until the time of the delivery of the vehicle. Again, any changes to that still stay in reserves, or if there's a negative deficit, has to come from reserves. The next line item, Your Worship, is Conservation Authority. The annual operation levy which was estimated at present, which I believe I may refer to Deputy Reeve Wise, is $84,323, and a capital levy contribution of $4,760 to the Queen Conservation Capital Programs. Also included in the conservation is a $1,500 contribution allocation for the Cataract Trail.
Quite good difference. John, we had a meeting a while ago, and you said some work being done on one day. Was there a figure with that at all?
No, it's just estimates. I can't remember exactly what they were. It's a dam at 13 Island Lake. Primary benefit would be to Frontenac Township. There'd be some downstream benefit to to Stone Mills and possibly Napanee as well. That I don't believe is in the budget for this year.
Okay.
So it would impact us in 2022, but again, I'm not 100% certain on that, but I can bring that information to the next budget meeting.
I know we discussed it there, I guess I didn't know it was this year, next year.
Yeah, I don't know if, has Christina, or you've been notified of the possibility of an additional capital expense this year?
Your worship, we have not. We were actually hoping that we would get some advanced communication from you as to what may be coming as part of that, but I don't believe that we've received anything additional from the conservation.
I'll follow up on that then.
Thank you. Move on, Brian.
Your worship, moving on, the next department is the Public Works, Streetlights and Landfills. Again, Public Works Manager Thompson here and Road Supervisor Ian Veris. Included in this year's budget is proposed gravel resurfacing and padding, surface treatment and sidewalk upgrades in 2021. A summarized list of these projects will be included at the next budget meeting. They are in progress and finalization, but we felt that getting through the budget in financial terms this evening would be a success on its own rather than getting into capital projects and the specifics of those areas. We have the inclusion of $199,036 in OCIF funding, $244,270 in federal gas tax, which is an increase to the gas tax from 2020 of $10,620. OCF has remained the same. The federal gas tax of $108,045 will be used for the loan repayment, which was, I believe, if you could just cover that, Treasurer Beauchamp.
So your loan repayment would be for the Dewey Road and the building of the actual road garage next door.
And the other 136,224, your worship, would be utilized in the resurfacing budget. Included in this budget is a $910,000 capital purchases that include a list of the following. Rubber tire excavator replacement at $220,000. The replacement of truck 0112, which is a half ton, at $40,000. The replacement of 2 tandem plow trucks. I believe they're both carryover or just one. Both of them are carryover from 2020. So that money essentially stayed in reserves and is being pulled out of reserves for 2021, as well as the replacement of 0613, which is an F550. And the recommendation is to replace that with a 3/4 ton with a budget of $50,000. Also included in the budget is the county operations maintenance budgeting. Again, it's important to reiterate the 10% clause that's included with that funding. In 2021, we're going to get $1,004,868.48 to complete the maintenance agreement for the county of Lennox and Addington's road system that exists inside Stone Mills Township. And the 10% clause is that if we're over that by 10%, we will receive compensation from LNA County for the portion over. And if we're under by more than 10%, we will reimburse the county for the number that we are under by more than 10%. Included in the budget is of 2021 is application and budget allotment for the 2 16-week summer student positions. Again, we never budget for them to be successful applications. However, if we're successful through our Ontario Jobs Grant, then that further reduces the budget and will provide increased contribution to reserves. The funds included in the municipal budget for sidewalks and road painting are an annual allotment for the completion and the improvement to those budget lines. Again, I suspect those detailed lists will follow at a later date. And that's a standard dollar value that's attached to that budget. And we essentially complete as much work in those categories as we can for the budget line that's attached. The inclusion of increase to pavement preservation. Staff has included microsurfacing on Lake Road to extend the life cycle of our surface treatment roads. And road resurfacing will consist of the completion of McQuay Road, 2.4 kilometers, and that's a major reconstruction. as well as Miller Road, 3.14 kilometers, Colebrook Road, 2.16 kilometers, Wagger Road, 0.7 kilometers, and a single on Hinch, which is 8.5 kilometers.
I just have something for you, Jeff, the micro, yeah, micro service, is that the same as was put out up here,
That's correct.
and you're satisfied with it?
It seems to be holding up. We'll know in a month, but it seems to be working well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Joe.
Jeff, on Hinch Road, that 8.5, is that the rest of Hinch Road that didn't get done, or is it just going back over what was done?
That's going back over what was done last year and the previous year, so it'll be a complete single surface, the HL3 top coating.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
Jeff, on McQueen Street, that's a complete reconstruction. The removal of that bridge, we replacing it with a box culvert or steel culvert?
That's the design that we're having completed right now and should be almost completed. Design of a box culvert that we can install ourselves.
The box, okay. And on Miller Road, coming out of Croydon, you're doing realignment of that corner, there any property issues there?
It's actually the section from County Road 4 into Howes Road that hasn't been reconstructed in several years. The southern portion, we put a single on last year, and I think it was 7 years before that we reconstructed it. And the piece from Frizzell Road to Haggerty was reconstructed in 2013, I believe.
Okay, go ahead.
Your Worship, moving into the next line items. Thank you, Councilor Davison. There's a design for the replacement of the Tweed Road and McQuay Road bridges, and the removal of which is $25,000 for the design work, which I believe is already well underway, as well as the removal of box culverts and replacement with large culverts on McQuay, Dowdle, and Airports Road in the amount of $120,000. This expense is as a result of the bridge inspections / closures in 2020 that we got in the last quarter. Also included in this budget is a reallocation of the Centerville Quarry hydro poles, which are located on the east side of the quarry. We're relocating those to accommodate the potential for application for future expansion of that quarry. You'll notice in the budget that there's an exclusion of granular crushing from annual allocations. This is as a result of the municipality doing duplicate crushing for multiple years, and we are now essentially reallocating those reserve funds that are normally pulled for crushing, and we're allocating those into other expenses in 2021. So you'll see a significant budget decrease to the crushing, but you'll see other areas like culverts and areas of that nature that are significantly higher than other years. We're utilizing the break in crushing to try to get caught up on some of those asset deficiencies that have somewhat been lasting. Also included is the there's $55,070 that's being earmarked to assist with establishing the northern limitations of the Sheffield waste disposal and making some site improvements to that location. At completion, I think Public Works Manager Thompson would be happy to provide some feedback as to what his plans are with that project. Also, COVID permitting, we also have included a household hazardous waste day in 2021 with a $60,000 upset budget, $30,000 from reserves, and $30,000 from the 2021 budget. Also inside this budget includes a $4,900 increase in compensation and alteration of a job description for an employee to assume the fleet supervisory responsibilities of the township fleet, including the fire department.
Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. So in regards to the Sheffield waste site, $55,000 to establish the northern limitations. What does that actually mean? What has to be done there, and who has to do it?
So I meet MOE in April. if you're familiar with the site, the parking pad that's up on top where the waste disposal is currently in place. It's been there for several years. There's rumors that there's scrap and metals in that fill area. We want to get a mining permit from the ministry, remove that, establish our northern footprint so we can keep moving the landfill to the established footprint that's there now. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just don't know where that money is actually being spent. Is that time and staff time, or is that going to a consultant or a license fee? I just didn't quite understand how that would spend.
That's in our own time and machine time and rental machine time.
Okay,
Is the increase.
right. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Go ahead, Kevin.
Quick one, is that gonna expand the life of the dump any, Jeff, or is it just changing the way the workings of the dump?
It'll utilize the footprint that we have permission to be on now, and it will exceed as long as, right now that landfill is kind of year to year based on our water sampling and testing. So there's no closure date for it, but we're hoping to be able to utilize the property that we have approvals for.
Moving on, Jeff, there at some point through this budget thing, can you give us the lifespan on all our dump sites? We don't need it tonight, but just nice to know.
Yeah, we had the annual report last year, but with COVID, we never had that presentation of that we normally have in previous years, so.
Yeah, it's at some point, okay. Okay, we'll move on, Brian.
Your worship, moving into the next department is the Development Services and Bylaw Enforcement. Again, this evening, Planning Manager Sands, at the following of this, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer those. Included in the budget this year is $20,000 for external planning assistance to facilitate the completion of the 5-year official plan, site plan control bylaw review, intensive livestock bylaw review, cannabis interim control review, and updating the zoning bylaws result of changes to those bylaws. Also, there's costs inclusion for the civic addressing bylaw in the amount of $2,500, with a large amount of the costs having been expensed and inventoried, waiting to proceed from past years. We also have inclusion of legal costs associated with potential appeals to LPAT. There are no appeals that, knock on wood, there are no appeals that are known. However, with the sheer increase in volume, the likelihood and probability that we would have an appeal that we would have to defend goes up, and we want to ensure that even if we don't have one this year, that we have proper reserves or proper funds set aside should we ever have to defend a decision at LPAT. Inclusion also the increased revenue to reflect actual revenues and expenses as a result of increased activity. Since we introduced a manager of planning, which I believe is coming up on 2 years, our volume has continued to increase on an annual basis, and we're attempting to attach our forecasts to the best of our ability to those predictions. They seem to only be going in one direction, which is up, but we don't want to assume that we're going to continue to have the same application numbers year to year without having some statistical data over multiple years to support that request. Also this year, which has been spoke about and passed with council, Part 8 requirements, which is the septic inspection of the building code, was given up by KFL&A Health Unit starting January 1, 2021, and the municipality has assumed those responsibilities. Likewise, we'll receive the fees, but are also looking at hiring an inspector for those Part 8 responsibilities under Part 8 of the building code. So included in Part 8, there's essentially $1,400 in fees per application that could be received by the municipality. $500, which is the first, which is a comment on I believe, if you want to provide the term, Jason, is it a consent application? Every person pays the $500 fee, correct?
Yeah, through your worship, and just to
assist on that point. Essentially, when an application, any real form of planning act application, so minor variance, site-specific zoning, consent, lot addition, etc., those applications necessitate a review from a party, as our entire municipality is serviced privately. There is a consideration given. So any form of real planning act application necessitates that review, and that it comes with a $500 review fee to demonstrate conformance and ability to function sufficiently on that lot. To make up the rest of what CAO Brooks's comment was, the $1,400, there's a $950 fee should it be a new application to install a system on a property for example, new lot creation for a new dwelling. So there's a structure there that exists where you may not get $1,400 wholesome on every form of application because it may not necessitate a new system, but you would get a review fee, for example. So hopefully that provides some clarity.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. Also included in this is the inclusion of the Parkland Reserve contribution to reflect the forecasted fees based on the $2,500 per application. So it's important to note that the Parkland Reserve is a separate fund from our municipal budget. We essentially facilitate the flow through as part of applications, and we transfer those funds to another fund, which you will see later on that the municipality can use in lieu of Parkland as part of developments. So in the past, they have not been recorded in the budget, but we felt for transparency perspective, we should show the amount of money coming in from Parkland and show that transfer moving over to the respective fund, and that has a zero impact on the budget. Essentially, if we budget 50,000 and only receive 40, there's not a shortfall, as we will also only be transferring 40 to that reserve. So it's a net impact of zero to the budget. In addition to this, there's budget transitions as an administrative assistant moves to a development services clerk. As part of our realignment, we're recommending that, and supported by council, is to have one of our existing administrative assistants become a full-time development services clerk, which would support our building, the Part 8 increase, as well as our current increase in planning activity. Any questions, Brian?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, the Parkland Reserve fee, I thought that was a percentage based on value. Is this an average that you would anticipate this $2,500, or has the formula changed?
Through your worship, thanks for the question, Deputy Wise. Under the Planning Act, there's two considerations of parkland. So parkland as in land itself conveyed to the municipality, and or cash in lieu of parkland up to a maximum valuation of 5%. Typically in subdivision development, you obtain parkland in its form of land transferred to municipality, where consent applications as our lion's share of applications, we don't want individual parkettes. We prefer the cash in lieu at the 5% valuation. Historically, this municipality has always done the valuation to that upper threshold and brought in the parkland valuation or the levy on that appraised value on a one-off application type. The appraisals have consistently been done by Mr. Robert Storing. From an administration perspective, there's time delays in that, and there's also unease in an applicant coming forth with a request to make a submission based on the unknown of what that fee would be on the onset of provisional approval. So for that reason, staff have worked an average over the past 5 years, as well as done a fulsome review of neighboring municipalities to understand what a consistent parkland fee, as opposed to an individual assessment on a one-off basis, would be, and derive the value of $2,500 to come, so that there's an administrative, a lessened workload from an administrative perspective, as well as a consistent approach and a level of understanding from an applicant upon submission. We feel that this fee is consistent and is in keeping with what our averages were over time. It's not necessarily a fee that has to be set and never changed.
It is a fee that we've incorporated in the budget for the purposes of showing that transparency, as CAO Brooks mentioned. But that's where we are proposing it and administering it that way through 2021 forward, as opposed to the former historic appraised value on a one-off basis. If that's helpful.
Yeah, that is a significant change. I think that's something that we should maybe be discussing at another time, because it seems that someone who's proposing a house or whatever that is likely to be valued in the high hundreds of thousands is paying $2,500. The same as someone who comes to the township because we have a 600 square foot minimum for a building that might only be $150,000, and they're paying $2,500 too. So it's something that I'd like to discuss at some point anyway. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I don't know about anybody else here, but what is this and who has to pay it? I'm confused as
Well,
to
the applicant.
that, but what's it for? I just don't quite understand where it's headed.
Go ahead, Jason.
Through your worship. The fee in conversation, Council Richmond, is 100% a fee that's provided to the municipality by the applicant when they go through a process of creating a new lot. So it doesn't apply for a site-specific zoning amendment, for example. It doesn't apply to a minor variance, or it doesn't apply to a building permit, even, for example, putting an addition onto a house. It's simply applying to the division of the land. So anybody subject to division of land via planned subdivision and or consent, that there's a parkland component of that that's considered.
Is that for a single lot? Like somebody wants to subdivide a single lot, they would pay $2,500?
Through your worship, that's historically not the way it's been calculated. It's always historically been calculated at a one-off basis based on the appraised value. But yes, this consideration moving forward would be that it be a one-off lump sum of $2,500 per parcel.
Go ahead.
Have we always had that, like, Jason? I'm just wondering, is this something new that people are gonna have to pay the $2,500 for, or has it always been there?
Through you, it's always been in place. And to Deputy Reeve Wise's commentary previous, in often the case, it exceeds this figure of the 25 range.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry, Manager of Planning Sands. Can you elaborate? Was that included in our fee bylaw change, the Parklands? The recommended change? It was included in the tariff bylaw, correct?
Yeah.
And secondly, previous to elaborate slightly further, it was 5% of the appraised value previous, wasn't it? Or what was that percentage number?
Yeah, through it's the planning act sets the upper limit. It doesn't set the lower. So 5% is the max, and that's historically what municipalities always done from an appraisal perspective on the land.
So from a process perspective, Councillor Richmond, Mr. Storing would essentially do the appraisal of what the valuation of the property is. 5% of that in history would have been given to the municipality in the Parkland, and those funds would have been set aside into a different fund utilized by the municipality for Parkland purposes. And you'll see us utilizing those later on in the budget for a recreation-based initiative for the township.
Do you have something, Doug?
Yeah. In history, at one time, we had a $300 flat fee for Parkland, and we took that out and we did go to the, that's way back, maybe even predates amalgamation. And then we went to the 5% in lieu of. But I think like John, like, we need to maybe discuss it a little later on how it will work, and maybe have some numbers to back up and show how it works for us, and using the comparisons like John used.
Have something, Jason?
No, through your worship, I can say, yeah, absolutely, no problem. We'll report back to the following sitting with council and budgetary conversation, and we'll return with that data.
Anybody else on this topic? Move on, right?
Okay, Your Worship, the next budget coverage is the building, rooftop, solar projects, and property management. And again, CBO Detler is here this evening, properties manager, as well as the Parks Recreation Arena Supervisor, Al Fenwick, for arena or parks-based questions as we progress through the next few departments. In 2021, the following projects are proposed for properties management department within the township. There's inclusion in the budget for the Cameron East building removal of $40,000, which first question is going to be, we already had that in 2020. Because it was unutilized, it got put into reserves. Now, because we're into a new year, that money gets pulled out of reserves and is put into this year's budget for the demolition of that building, which I believe is underway or going to be underway in the next 24 hours. Also is the installation of the exterior upgrades, as well as windows at the Newburgh Hall, and the budget allotment of $50,000 for those exterior updates. The installation of a new boiler at the Enterprise Fire Hall with a $20,000 budget. The installation of a backup generator at the Enterprise Hall with a $10,000 budget. The replacement of 3 overhead garage doors at the Aaronsville Public Works Yard with a $10,000 budget limit. I believe they're already complete. Is that correct? CBO Detler? Are those overhead doors already complete? As well as installation of an electric vehicle charging station at the municipal offices. It's important to note that, based on the $5,000 budget allotment, this is not the typical public charging station that we've talked about in the past. This is actually to accommodate the second from the bottom inclusion item, where the CBO is recommending the purchase of 2 electric SUVs for building inspection services. Both his as well as the Part 8 inspector to be hired to utilize some efficiency and some energy savings moving forward. Also, we have included in here is the inclusion of $280,000 for the ventilation upgrade / retrofit for this and repairs to the steel structure of the building to be completed in 2021. To elaborate further on that point, I just noted that it's not very well written, but the building to discuss is the Public Works Garage. At present, we have ventilation / condensation issues in the building, which is going to require redesign of the current ventilation system, as well as some repairs / retrofit to some of the damage that's been caused as a result of the design. Also, the rooftop solar generation project is now fully expensed in the revenues available for municipal budget inclusion. So if I may just slip back up to the $280,000 line item. The $280,000 is being budgeted for the combination of past year's budgets that have been allocated for this project, but not utilized. And the solar revenue from that rooftop project is being allocated for only 1 year towards this project to get corrective action improvements to the ventilation and to repair the issues of that building.
Yeah, I do. On that solar rooftop, back when we first installed it, there was discussions that after we paid it off and the profits were coming in, we would use it for projects like this or others, but that we would also set some aside for reserves for the end of life event, when it has to be removed or whatever happens after the end of the 20-year contract, because we don't know. It will not be renewed at the price that we're paid today, that's for sure. So I'm happy with this, but I think we need to put it in front of ourselves for the remaining 8 years of the contract, that we need to put some portion aside for end of life of that project.
Your Worship, Councilor Davis and I spoke on this topic earlier today. Unfortunately, that conversation, as we talked in comedy earlier today, predates most of our management, and we were not aware of a conversation. But the intent is still the same as what we've asked our solar projects in our community, which is to set aside revenue for the decommissioning of the project. So I would hope that council would support us taking a portion of this year to do some research and have a report brought to council as to what that decommissioning requirements may look like now that there should be some data available as to some solar projects that may have to have decommissioned already, or some information that's out there by solar providers. So included earlier, we talked about the contribution of the solar revenue from the Community Vibrancy Fund. And here's the project for the medical expansion costs with an upset budget of $250,000 as previously mentioned. Included in this budget is the purchase of 2 electric sport utility vehicles for building inspection services with a budget per vehicle of approximately $55,000. Also included in this budget, the costs associated with the implementation of a compliance coordinator position to assist with the increased corporate responsibilities of Part 8 inspection. So again, it's important to reiterate the responsibility of the municipality to ensure that the fees associated with the building department, as well as now Part 8, remain inside the building departments and dispersed towards building specific initiatives, and those reserves to be kept to reflect those same values, that it's a department specific budget and that any surplus or deficit should be borne by that department. Any questions, your worship? Anybody? Do you have something?
Just one, and it sort of relates to this. The gas tax that we get, $244,000 or so. Has there been any thought given, Brian, from farther up the municipal governments on what will happen when we go electric? More electric vehicles, less gas. Is there going to be any kind of funds for the roads once it changes? Has anybody ever discussed that or heard anything about it?
I haven't. The greatest, maybe Deputy Revoice has some more information, but the information that we're getting, or not the information, because that's certainly not a specific topic that we receive updates on, but some of the professional seminars that we've been part of has actually spoke to the requirement for us to do infrastructure upgrades from a hydro perspective to accommodate electric vehicles. Because even though the push is on to improve and move towards those in higher density areas, the draw from chargers may not be supported by our current infrastructure. So there is going to be a phase in public/private partnership, but there are going to be pressures bigger before we get to those on whether our hydro infrastructure can handle the charging of these vehicles, plus, as you say, that the loss of revenues that could be created from diverting that to an electric-based vehicle.
Yeah, well, it's just a thought. I mean, if that's where it's heading, and it is. I just wondered if there's never been any thought into that.
At one of our sessions, Councillor Richmond, we heard that in the more dense areas, a city block, and this was just a presenter, I wouldn't put a name attached to it, was that in some places they could handle 3 to 5 electric vehicles on a block, and anything above that may cause some infrastructure issues with how the current infrastructure of hydro is able to handle additional loads in high density areas. So we just took that as an interesting tidbit. Certainly doesn't apply as much to us in the rural base that we have greater separation, but it is something that will be required as we move towards that.
Go to Deputy Revoice, you may have comments.
Yes, thanks. It's one of a myriad of questions. What happens when we make this, assuming we do, huge transition over the next 2 or 3 decades? And all the existing hydro infrastructure is going to have to be upgraded. And as well, we have to improve generation capacity in a way that does not emit CO2 and methane. So it's huge, and these are the sorts of things that are being talked about at sort of high levels. But, there's no comprehensive plan yet. But as far as funding roads to replace the gas tax, I think the government will find a way to tax the hydro that we're putting into our cars. Don't worry about that part, Kevin.
You still gotta use the road, that's I guess is my point.
Yeah.
The electric or whatever you want.
Yeah.
Hydrogen or whatever it is, the road is still being utilized. And we still have to keep them up.
Yeah,
smoke in my ear.
Oh, yeah, it's being tossed around all over the place, but it's still just in the conceptual stage.
Right.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, and I read a lot about this stuff. Google it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, Kevin, there's one thing I can guarantee you when you're dealing with federal and provincial government, change is always an option. And I'll give you an example. At one time, the municipalities here received a 75%, 70%, depending on which one of the former municipalities it was, road grant towards their operating budget. We don't get any of that today. Gas tax come along, that was a new one. We used to get developed road grants where they would pay 90% of a road. That's gone by the wayside. So as John said, they'll find a way somewhere along, whether it be tolls or whatever, there'll be a way that money has to come from somewhere.
Anybody else have any comments or questions on this topic before we move on? Okay, Brian, go ahead. Your worship, the next line item, or next department, sorry, is Snowmills Parks and Recreation, and as mentioned, CBO Detler and Parks Recreation and Marine Supervisor Al Fenwick are here for questions should council have any. Included in this year's budget is the replacement of the Centennial Park dock with a budget of $40,000. It also includes for allocation for summer employment to assist with parks, recreation, and municipal property maintenance, equivalent to 2 students. Again, we've made application for subsidy for students in this department. Past precedent has told us that we may be successful for some, but highly unlikely to be successful for all. So we include the costs of those students inside of our budget and await for positive change should that come as part of a successful application. It's also important that it doesn't specifically speak to the arena rates inside this budget, but it was a collective discussion or the absence of such that our focus was trying to remain on staying open and providing a resource to the community for recreation activity rather than talk about rate increases. We did not, forecast anything given the current times and the disruption to the season. We thought that it was best served for a discussion at a more stable time, more likely for 2022, or if council wishes to talk about this after budget as part of a change going into the next hockey season, that might be more prudent rather than a time where we're just hopeful to gain another 6 weeks out of our current season. Included in this budget is a revenue forecast compared to 2020 at 90% revenues as well as 90% staffing to our part-time employees. So during any sort of service disruptions, it's important to identify that our supervisor that's here this evening has a responsibility to maintain supervisory responsibilities to that facility, but also had transitioned to our public works department to provide additional support whenever possible to ensure that there was extra assistance there rather than consuming additional hydro and taking on capital projects inside of our closed arena. So we put 90%. Confidently, if we had no further service disruptions, we think that we could challenge the 100%. However, we do have the arena construction project that is set to happen this summer, as well as North Frontenac will reopen next season in their hockey season. We expect to lose some rentals, as well as we're factoring in some consideration in case we get delayed as part of construction to the start of the 2021-2022 hockey season. We're hopeful that we would stay on time, but we built in a small threshold in the form of $17,000 in revenue and also the wages to provide us some relief should something be different than what we're presently experiencing. So also leading into the next part, we have the grant project that the municipality has been successful for. It's actually a combination of 2, which includes the replacement of the arena floor, the boards, the header, chiller, condenser, all inside the Stone Mills Community Center. This budget is $1.25 million, which is a combination of grants in the amount of $833,000 and recommended use of the Parkland reserves of $289,700 and arena reserves of $77,000. We're utilizing the Parkland reserves that were spoke about earlier, to invest into the recreation and relying on the applications coming forward to replenish that fund at a rather, a much quicker time period than what we previously experienced for that. So it's important to note that with the government assistance and our reserves, that we're not actually envisioning any of these costs coming out of the budget, but they've been planned as part of reserve contribution and government grants.
Any questions or comments on this? Go ahead, John.
Yes, thanks. I'm just wondering where that project stands in terms of tender and where are we at? What's the anticipated start date, or is it too soon to tell?
Jake, you want
Can I just start that and I could probably say,
to?
sorry, your worship, not to hush Jake, but at present, Deputy Wise, there was a tender put, or an RFQ, sorry, put out for the engineer design services for the project. That was last Thursday, so there will be a report coming to council this Monday evening. The received quotes were almost double what the project budget called for, and so it's actually, as part of the clauses in the RFQ, we're actually recommending to cancel that, figure out why these prices come in double, and attempt to correct that as part of a future RFQ for interested vendors. We also only received 2 submissions of interested parties that were, so something inside of our project design or our plan has, or market maybe, has caused design firms to not be interested in this project. So I believe Jake is intending to do some research, have some discussions with the submission, the firms that submitted, and make that information known to council as part of plans going forward.
Thank you.
Jake, you want to comment on this?
Following this meeting, I'll be writing a report for Monday's meeting. Thank you, Your Worship.
Anybody else? Any questions on this? We go through all the reports here, I guess. Go ahead, Brian, we got a conclusion page there, we might as well.
So that concludes the department overview, Your Worship. So providing some numerical impacts. The general recommended increase to the taxpayers is 1.25% based on the information presented to you this evening. So I'll allow you to consume that 1.25% tax increase and try not to murky the waters by proceeding as part of an explanation. Normally, we have some confusion that's created amongst phased in assessments, and that therefore varies home to home as to what their increase in taxes are. Due to COVID, there was no phased in assessment that was done in 2020, and therefore, unless you made some additions or subtractions to your home, you should have the same assessment as you did in 2020. So we can confidently say your taxes would go up 1.25% for the municipal portion. That is combined also with the county and the province rates, which are to follow. That would be the case if we didn't have, which is the next line, we have, because of those additions, we have a 1.72% increase to our assessment. So our growth last year to our municipality was 1.72, which results in a tax decrease to our rate. Normally, Councillor Davison is always suggesting that we don't feel that reduction in rate because of the assessment. This year, it should actually be a reduction unless your assessment changed for a building permit or some sort of increased value to your property. So that's a reduction to the tax rate of 6.14%.
Just before you go any further, anybody who follows on YouTube, what does the dollars of 1% equal?
A 1% tax increase, I believe, is 57.
1% tax increase is 54,500.
54,500. I apologize. At one point, a 1% was 57,000. So that number is in our head. So 1% is 54. And so essentially, I believe our increase, and I'm not staring at the actual budget page, but our additional dollars is 70.
Our additional dollars is $71,687.59 that we're asking from the taxpayer. So we will see a reduction if you kept the same assessment.
Okay, I just thought that would help the people following along with this. Any questions? Got something, John?
Well, it's not actually a 1.25% tax increase, and it's, if I understand it correctly, we're looking to raise 1.25% more budget compared to last year. So it's an increase in the total because of inflation and whatever. But because we have an increase in assessment of nearly 1.75%, then the actual tax rate goes down, which is sort of win-win all around. It's great. It's a good budgeting, and this is going to cost anybody who hasn't had an increase in his assessment any more money. In fact, less.
Go ahead, Brian, anything else on there before we, or any questions on
Your
that?
Worship, there's no other points from us. We would hope to utilize the last portion of this budget, if you will. If council members have any questions to the staff that are here, and we'll wait your direction and schedule moving forward as to what council wishes for next meetings.
You know, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Christina, we have a section here, reserve funds, there's nothing in it, so can we have that for the next meeting, or so that we can compare how much they've gone up or gone down?
It will depend on when you schedule the next meeting, so that I can finish year end to get those figures.
I can just get Christina there. I mean, what are you talking like, a couple weeks? I don't know, we're just tossing this over there. Almost.
Our audit is scheduled for the March 17th week. And so I have to have all of those figures done prior to that.
Sounds good. Go ahead, John.
So I had several questions just about specific line items. I'm thinking that we'll do line items maybe in the next budget meeting rather than get into the weeds tonight.
I would think so.
Yeah, that's fine.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Is the county getting close to their budget being completed, or?
Go ahead, John.
We've started. We've had one budget meeting, and staff is probably going to present us with a second draft at the next opportunity. I don't know when that will be at this point.
Anybody else? Sorry, when did you hand up?
That's okay. So I just wanted to say, there's some really interesting things in this budget that I haven't seen in it before. Jeff knows exactly what I'm talking about. 2 electric SUVs.
No, we can't get
But I really liked a lot of the stuff that I saw here, and I want to commend everybody for the good work that you've done in putting together a pretty creative budget. You know, the arena's going to get some good stuff out of that. The medical center, these are all good, healthy, community-based initiatives that, you know, can get people back on good health and heading forward. And I see some good, really good efficiencies with the restructuring that was presented. And anyway, thank you very much. And thanks for the SUVs.
But it has the past check.
It's the thought that counts.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Can we get a cost of what COVID actually cost the municipality? Is that really hard to do? Because we know it's impacted every department, right?
It is a challenge, Councillor Thompson, and largely because with every cost or impact to our operations has also come with foregone labor. For instance, I'll use the halls as an example. We haven't received the revenue to the halls, but we haven't had the activity in the janitorial and the damage created as the use of those halls as well. So we can show you what's foregone revenue, and we could show you what our normal overhead expenses are. But it's very difficult because we know that what we forecast in the form of budget, there's a number of other variable issues that usually occur that we could say, this is what we budgeted and this is what we lost. But then we have to compound the fact that we've got COVID resilience funding on 2 separate occasions in the form of now, I believe, 200, close to $200,000 that has been injected into different areas to compensate for that. So in some cases, we've actually saved money in the sense where we've deferred projects and they've been put into future years. In other cases, as I mentioned, we have foregone revenues as well as corresponding expenses to those. So we can attempt if there's a specific department that we can zero in on. But as we mentioned before, as there was a call out that we could apply for additional COVID expenses if we could demonstrate a need. At the last analysis that was presented to council, it was the management's recommendation that it would be difficult to recommend making application for more COVID funding, as the conversation was that the funding that was provided likely compensated and made the municipality whole based on the revenues and impacted costs, net costs that we would have realized as a result of those alterations. We would have to analyze the tax loss that we authorized, the ability to say how many garbage disposals that were done. It's so, I would be worried that nobody would want to put their name on it, so to speak, because there would be so many assumptions in the report, similar to the one that we had when we were considering making application for COVID resilience fund. But if there's a specific area that you believe were most impacted, I believe our staff would be happy to focus on individual areas to try to analyze what that impact may have been and what fund or compensation was provided to offset that.
So it'd be fair to say that COVID did impact this.
Yes, it's definitely impacted our operations, because we weren't able to operate halls, we weren't able to have a lot of the functions that we normally would do. But for instance, a number of the organizations that requested for donations to the municipality, well, some of them didn't have their events, and therefore, the municipality didn't provide the donations to those events. So there's so many things that contribute to deferrals of events that didn't happen and programs that didn't run, that in order to do a proper analysis, we should be putting that cost savings against any sort of overhead impacts that we had to make to comply with it. At present, we've been able to make claims for costs associated with COVID, but they haven't asked us to basically, okay, now what savings have you had to justify the difference between the two? And that would be an interesting document to see if we could accurately predict what everything would have been.
Yeah, at last, I'd like to thank you, Brian. It's one of the best budgets I've seen in a while, and you and your management team have worked very hard, and that makes it easy for council to have a strong hard look.
Thank you. I guess, go ahead, Brian, go ahead.
Just a question for the public, I guess. Can they get a copy of this, public, Brian, or is it on the web page, or so they can go through it as well?
Okay, I think we've had a pretty good meeting tonight. Oh, sorry. Well, I thought you said yes.
No, I did. I just wanted to be able to point to the people of the audience that are watching virtually. That link for our Compass agenda this evening has the copy of the budget, including comments for variations of lines, as well as the budget narrative, the exact same document that you have there this evening. So they're posted on our agenda link, and people can access those through that way.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, if we're pretty well done, if you don't mind, I got a 7 o'clock Zoom meeting, so.
No, that's what I got.
I'd like to get to it.
Zoom on out.
So I guess I feel we've done pretty good tonight. We'll wrap it up, and if we can pick a date for another meeting, we'll go. We'll get down to the nitty-gritty and what's good for staff here for a meeting?
Well, my question is for council, was the timeline. I wanted to, with council's direction, normally we will receive, public interest. Somebody will send us some information that we'd like to get forwarded to council. My suggestion was, and not knowing what the planning schedule this far in advance, was whether we could have a special budget meeting, so to speak, an hour or an hour and a half ahead of council, if that was amenable to council, as the nights were already set aside. We were thinking, based on what Christina had, was the night of March 15th, which is our second council meeting in March. We would schedule a 5 o'clock budget meeting until, say, 6 o'clock. Any questions that are provided to our staff, we can provide answers or at that meeting. But I wasn't sure if council wished to have one. I wanted to see what the conversation of council was this evening, whether we wanted a separate night, further discussion, or whether we wanted to remain. So we'll leave that at council's leisure as to when they want it.
I think it's just my thought here, I wouldn't mind, you have a council meeting, have a budget meeting before council. And the first thing you know, you're into something you don't get done in your rushed for time. I would like to see one more meeting like this, then we get through it, and then we can plan out a meeting for it. An hour might seem all right, the first thing we're into an hour and a half. I mean, we've got an hour and a half tonight here. So that's just my thoughts. Anybody else?
Well, could we have a closed session after Monday night, just to discuss a couple of issues that need these closed session? At the end of Monday night's council meeting? Talking about the employee situations where somebody could be identified or a safe. We could have a conversation at the end of the meeting.
I guess it'd be, what's the difference? I know, I'm just asking her, difference there, I actually have.
Well, it's two different things you're talking about.
No, it'll be directed towards the budget meeting here, but we could have that after Monday night's meeting and have it out of the way so that we can go forward with it.
I guess I'll need to help on that.
So if we're intending, my recommendation is if we're intending to have a special council meeting for a budget, we would just have a closed session component at the end of that.
Okay.
If we're having it if we're looking at trying to duplicate on a council night, then my recommendation would obviously be to include that as a closed session. When we start to do that, Councilor Davison, I fear that we get into what the Reva suggests as a meeting, and then by the time we get closed, it really impacts the time that's necessary to discuss it. So my preference would be is if we're willing to have another council meeting separate, similar to this, then we would just have a closed session component to that at the end of that meeting.
Is there any way, if it's gonna affect the budget, we have a closed meeting prior to the budget meeting?
Absolutely.
Is that what you're starting to look
Yeah,
at?
I'm thinking there could be some slight change or whatever, and planning to discuss that so that staff have time to look.
So we pick a date for our next budget meeting, and we'll pick a time and have a closed session prior to. Everybody comfortable with that?
How about the 8th?
Well, what day is that?
8th is a Monday.
Go ahead, Brian.
So I actually just whispered to the Reeve, asking whether next Thursday worked. The difficulty with, Councilor Davison, the difficulty with Monday nights is if we do start at 5 o'clock, we're technically still open here at the office. So it doesn't accommodate an earlier start, which I was attempting, as long as we're providing the YouTube link, I was just trying to accommodate staff if we got into late weather, et cetera. So my suggestion, I didn't know whether if council's willing, Thursday night seemed to be it's an off council week if we wanted to do.
I'm fine with Thursday, I'm just trying to get staff a week to prepare, that's all.
What's that date?
I think it's the 4th.
Fourth, so at 5,
Yeah,
Brian?
I know the thing is on YouTube there, the county one around fourth. I think that's the fourth there. We got a council.
So we have a council meeting this Monday night coming. My recommendation is we'll come to an agreement. Okay. Schedule meeting that night.
Okay, we're excited tonight, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's that thing. We will. Call for I need a motion for adjourn tonight, by Sherry, second by Kevin. All in favor? Carry. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, staff.
So, you want these back?
Here.
Oh, okay.
until we make changes to the document, that can be a process, I don't go back. Okay. It's just if the narrative changes, we can ask. Consider this one side.
Yep.